We're learning the Maamar Hasam Nafsheinu Baxayim Tafshin Yudches. The Rebbe was Magia in honor of Gimel Tammuz Tafshin Memtes, and we're holding Siv Vav in the Maamar. In the previous part of the Maamar, the Rebbe was discussing the idea that on the pasuk Vayikach Koirach took. The Targum Unkos translates it as Ve'ispolei Koirach, that Koirach had separated. And we brought from the Noyam Elimelech, and based on a Zohar as well, the general idea that this separation was similar to the separation that Hashem made on the second day of creation between the Mayim Elyonim and the Mayim Tachtoinim, the upper and the lower waters. And what we explained was that the upper waters generally represent Ruchnius, pleasure in Ruchniisdika things. The lower waters represent pleasure in Gashmiisdika things. And what we explained was the mistake that Koirach made. And that is, the real reason why Hashem caused the separation to happen between the upper and the lower waters, the Gashmius and the Ruchnis, is so that Gashmius should have a tshuka, should have a longing, should have a yearning and a desire to go up higher into the Ruchnis, should appreciate the idea of Gilui Elikus, which down here in this world doesn't exist. Koirach had the understanding, Koirach made the mistake, that he thought that the purpose is that there should be, the tachlis is, that there should be the separation between Ruchnis and Gashmis, that Gashmis should remain as a separate Metzias for itself. Because really there's a certain advantage, a certain greatness in the Gashmis that's not found in the Ruchnis, which the Rebbe refers over here as the koyach of Gevura, of Tzimtzum, that power that Hashem has, so to speak, to hide His greatness, and which is expressed dafka in the creation of the lowly Gashmis. Now the truth of the matter is, la'ased lavoi, this greatness of Gashmis will be revealed, but in order to get there, you first have to have the idea that the Gashmis itself has to appreciate the greatness of Ruchnius in a place where there's Gili Elikus. And this is where Koirach made his mistake, thinking that Gashmis is a tachlis and a purpose for itself. In Avodas Hashem, the Rebbe explained this as the difference between the Avodah of B'chol Drochecha Do'eyu, which is a very, very great and important avodah and a very major goal. And ultimately, this is an amazing thing to find Elikus, even in the very Gashmis itself. But before getting to that level, one first needs to have the idea of appreciating in the Gashmis how this leads us to Avodas Hashem. The avodah of Kol Ma'asech L'Shem Shemayim. First, the person has to realize in his Gashmis, when he's doing business and involved in Gashmis, that it's going to get me closer to serving the Eibishter through Torah and mitzvahs. Eventually, through that, you could also get to the level of appreciating and realizing the likus that you could find in Gashmis itself. But otherwise, the Gashmis could drag you down. Says the Rebbe, in Seivav, al pi hanal yuva. Now we can also understand diuk lashon Razal, the diuk and the wording of the Razal. She'ein machzikin b'machloikas. It says that anyone that is machzik b'machloikas, maintains machloikas, is over and alav to be like koirach v'chadosai. The Razal say ein machzikin b'machloikas. You're not allowed to maintain machloikas. You're not allowed to keep up the machloikas. Machzikin daika. What does this mean? That implies the metzias hamachloikas atzma, the actual idea of separation itself. That is, the actual separation that happened between the upper and the lower waters, the upper pleasures and the lower pleasures. Gashmis aruchnius, he bria shenivrai de HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is something that Hashem created. The purpose of it, however, is that the Gashmis should be elevated to the ruchnius, should have this longing, the crying to be closer to Ruchnius. The problem is when one thinks that the purpose is that the separation should be maintained, that the machloikas, that the separation should remain. We said earlier in the Maamar that Koirach saw machloikas as a goal in and of itself. He wants the separation to remain. Shamayim atachtoinim yishar ulamata, that elyonim and tachtoinim should remain separate. He wants that the tachtoinim should remain down below. V'lo yiyeh b'hem atzimoyin lalas l'mayla, and should never have that desire, that yearning, that thirst to go up higher. That's the problem. The purpose of machloikas is that it should be able to be ultimately the connection between the two, that Gashmi should be connected and united with the Ruchnius. But Koirach thinks the point is that the Gashmi should remain down here. V'yesh lo hoisef, says the Rebbe, we can add furthermore. The kemoisha kavana bebriyas hamachloikas rekia amavdel b'yoyim hasheni. He b'chdeshi is barer b'yoyim hashlishi, just like when the Eibishter separated the waters on the second day. And we said that the purpose is that on the third day, now we'll start seeing that there's something called avodas ha'adam. As we explained that on the third day, now the dry land is visible, and a man can come along and start doing his avodah to elevate the lower waters, as we explained earlier. And on the third day, it says twice ki toiv, sh'oz gamer rakia ha'mavdul na'aseh toiv, because now we start seeing the goodness even of the separation, because the tachlis of that separation was that the mayim tachtonim will now go even higher than they were before. Al derech zeh b'negei l'machlokas koyrach, says the Rebbe, this is true not only in the way the Eibishter created the rakia that's going to separate between the waters. Really, the actual machlokas of koyrach itself was really for that purpose. The reason why the Eibishter, so to speak, allows for this machlokas to happen is only to come to better places as a result of this machlokas. In other words, the aliyah that comes as a result of it. Okamavur, Badrushim has explained in the Maamorim, that the reason why Moshe initially is trying to speak to Koyrach and his people, and trying to speak to them in ways of peace, trying to make peace, because Moshe thought, the Moshe Yoim HaShlishi, which the third day, just like the first day is Chesed, the second day is Gvura, the third day is Tiferes. So Moshe thinks that just like on the third day, which is Tiferes, was able to deal with, was able to elevate, was able to clarify and elevate that separation that happened on the second day, recognizing the purpose of it, to get the Mayim Tachtonim closer to the Mayim Elyonim. So he thought, he thought he could do the same thing with Koyrach. So we said earlier that Aaron is Chesed, Koyrach, which is a Levi, is Gvura, Moshe Rabbeinu, which it says he's the Darga of Tiferes, he's the third. Moshe is the third. We know that the Torah, which is a Torah of three, was given through Moshe Rabbeinu, who's the third in his family. He was the third. So Moshe Rabbeinu thinks that he's able to be mevader, the Gvura, to be mevader this machlokas, to clarify, to elevate, and bring out the point of why there was a separation. In other words, to bring Koyrach to recognize that he wants to get closer to Aaron, closer to Gili Elikus, closer to spirituality. Not to remain focused on the Gashmias. But this didn't happen. Because Koyrach wasn't interested. He wants to maintain the machlokas. He wants to maintain the separation. He wants to view it as if Gashmias is the main thing. Says the Rebbe, Valpizi Yeshlovar Mashamois Vatagrum Shveikach Koyrach Uvi Ispelei Koyrach Al Derech Rokia Mavdil Av Sheshmoishel Koyrach Atzmarem is Kanal Rokia Mavdil Rokia Keina Kerach. We asked a question earlier in the Maamar. The Targum says on the words Vayikach Koyrach, the Vayikach is V'ispelei, he separated. We explained that to mean that this is like the separation of the Rokia Mavdil. The question the Rebbe asked was, the word Koyrach itself, which is similar to the word Kerach, we have a pasuk that the Rokia is Ke'ena Kerach, the Rokia, the firmament was similar to ice. And Kerach, again, the same letters as the word Koyrach. So if Koyrach itself represents the Rokia Mavdil, that separation, why do I need the word Vayikach to mean separation? The Vayikach should be like the Rokia Mavdil. So says the Rebbe, Ki Shmoishel Koyrach. When we speak just about the name of Koyrach, that means Koyrach as he is on his own. Koyrach is also Lashon Karcha. Karcha is like a bald spot. Which also represents separation, where there's certain hairs being pulled out and separates from the other ones, etc. And there's different spots in the head. So when we say his name is Koyrach, that represents that this is his nature, the nature of separation, the way the Eibishter made it. In other words, like on the second day of creation, there's a certain type of machlokas that the Eibishter himself creates, but there's a certain reason and a potential for it. But now when it says Vayikach Koyrach, is actually what Koyrach is doing with that potential. Koyrach represents separation, but separation where the Eibishter makes separation. Vayikach Koyrach is already what Koyrach is doing about it. This is the machlokas that he's doing with his own free will and choice. So what's the Targum saying? And this is the Chiddush that Targum Unklos is telling us. The vayikach koirach of ispelei koirach al derech rokia mavdil. When we say that even the vayikach koirach is like rokia mavdil, not only koirach is like the separation of the rokia mavdil, which is something made by Hashem, but even the vayikach koirach, in other words, even the machloikas that koirach gets involved with, is also like the rokia mavdil. This is a bigger chiddush. What are we saying now? Shagam hamaisa the machloikas koirach, even the actual machloikas already of koirach, not only the potential for the machloikas. Even though this is already completely his choice, you know what? This is what we're saying. Even this is also related and similar to the Rakia Mavdil that Hashem makes. Meaning, that just like when the Eibishter makes the Rakia that separates, it said that ultimately it should be elevated, refined and fixed on the third day. Al derech zeu gam ve'ispelei koirach. Even the actual machloikas, as it happens already, even this had a purpose, that ultimately it should be able to be elevated through Moshe Rabbeinu. Says the Rebbe in Siv Zayin, what is the actual reason why Koirach made such a big mistake? To think that the purpose of the separation is the separation, to maintain the separation, that there should remain the separation between the Ruchnis and the Gashmias. This is all because of the lack of bittul of Koirach. How so? The zeshen is borely ill. This that we explained earlier in the Maamar in Siv Gimel. This that we explained earlier, that the purpose of the separation is that ultimately the mayim tachtoinim should have the yearning, the desire, the thirst to go up higher. So this idea that on the one hand it's mayim tachtoinim, and at the same time it wants to connect back with the mayim elyonim. Really, there are two opposite midos coming together over here, opposite midos. How so? If we look from the perspective of chesed, chesed is associated with giving, with gili elikus, with oiros, with revelation. As far as chesed is concerned, the greatest quality is, the greatest maila is that there should just be spiritual levels of pleasure, ruchni is the worlds, etc. As far as chesed is concerned, there's no need for the water to lechatchila separate and go down. That's the chesed perspective. On the other hand, from the gvura perspective, which again, gvura is about tzimtzum. Gvura is about being able to find create even something very, very lowly. Hamayli begili hashoyrish the mayim atachtoinim atzmam vein tzarich shebemayim atachtoinim yechuk v'tzimoin lotzis mimetziyusam v'lalas l'mayla. As far as gvura is concerned, let the gashmias remain gashmias, and let us find the advantage within gashmias itself. Let us find the elikus within gashmias itself. As we said before, there's a certain greater power of elikus found dafka in the physical thing that's created, and created in a way of multiplicity, etc., etc. And therefore, as far as that's concerned, there's no need for the Gashmis to try to go up. Let's find the advantage of Gashmis itself. Or in the language earlier that we said in the Maamar, that's like the Bechol Drochei. Who needs to think about Kol Ma'asechel L'Shem Shamayim is the attitude over here, that it's all for the purpose of going higher and getting closer through Torah and mitzvahs. Why not find the godliness within the Gashmis itself? And the Rebbe is going to go back to this point soon. So again, as far as chesed is concerned, there was no need for Gashmis at all. As far as gvura is concerned, there's no need for Gashmis to go up to Ruchnius. So the idea that we're saying that no, the mayim tachtoinim went down, but it's in order that, not that it should remain down, that it should have the thirst to go up. Hu mitzada tiferes. This happens as a result of tiferes. Because tiferes is kavo emtsoi. Tiferes is that middle line, that middle pillar, that middle mode. Shemechaber ha'afachim lechesed gevura. As Chassidus explains many times, the meaning of tiferes is beauty. Beauty is usually when you have a few colors coming together, forming a beautiful symphony or harmony, etc. A number of different things coming together. Tiferes is the chibur of chesed and gevura together. So that the small, the left side, the gvura, should be able to be included, to go up into the right side. That's what Tiferes achieves. V'liyo is the Indian iskalus umitzad bittul. Now, how does this iskalus happen? How do you have two opposites coming together? For that, you have to have bittul. Because each one of the, if you're only going in one mode, then there's no room for the other side. So how does the gevura want to go to become part of chesed? For that, you need to have bittul. But koirach was lacking this bittul. So to him, this just didn't sit. This didn't sit with him. This didn't fit right with him. He couldn't deal with this, having bittul, that the smoil, that the gashmi is, that he should have to go up to get closer to the ruchnius. In the language of other Maamorim and Sichos, where the Rebbe discusses koirach and Aaron, is that koirach, who's focusing more on the down, ma'aseh b'poil and all of that, thinks that there's no room for the ruchnius, the kavodah. He thinks the main avodah is just gashmius itself. He doesn't have this bittul to want to go up and out of himself and more to the Aaron sort of mode. The ruchnius is the commode. Says the Rebbe, the same thing is true when we speak about the avodah of kol masechel l'shem shamayim and b'chol drochecha de'eyu. D'zeh sha'agam she'yidei goydel ilu b'chol drochecha de'eyu. Even though we're speaking about a person that might know the great, amazing idea to find the likus in worldly matters itself. And yet the person says to himself that despite the fact that I can find godliness within each gashmis thing, and yet how am I going to be involved in my gashmis? It's always going to be to help me, how I could do Torah and mitzvahs better. In other words, again, to use an example, there's one way of saying I'm involved in business, I'm going to find in each aspect of my business how I can reveal and see the elikus in it. And yet, you're saying no. Number one, I'm going to make sure I'm only going to be involved in my business as much as it's going to help me be a better yid in learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. Then, once I'm doing that, I'll find the godliness in whatever I'm doing. So again, in order to make sure that he's only doing it in order to do Torah and mitzvahs, why they are bittul l'kayim ratzonali, and again, this only comes with a mode of bittul, to do what Hashem wants. The bekivin shavidase loyal ravis es tzimoyne she'egili elikus benafshe, since he's doing his avodah not just what feels better for me, that I could have gili elikus in my nefesh to quench my thirst. Elishu maser v'notzal l'kayim ratzon hakadosh baruch hu, where the focus is only what Hashem wants. And therefore what's relevant and matters to the person is not where he's going to find elikus in worldly matters and make him feel better. It's all about what does Hashem want. It's about doing what Hashem wants. And therefore, when I'm learning, when I'm eating, drinking, doing business and the like, it's always going to be in order so that I can do what Hashem wants. That's pshat kol masechel l'shem shamayim. As a result of that, I can now get to the next level of b'chol drochecha de'eyu. V'ayidei zeh yiloi gam agili elikus shebinyonei olam. Then I can discover the godliness also in the worldly matters. Ukenal has said earlier in Sifhei, shayidei avodah l'chol masechel l'shem shamayim. Then magim you could reach to the b'chol drochecha de'eyu. After this whole long explanation in the machloikas of koirach, which again briefly the point being was that koirach thinks that gashmis is a purpose for itself. And yes, maybe there will be a time that this will be nizgala, the purpose and the ultimate inyan of gashmis in itself. But in the meantime, the way it has to be is that gashmis has to thirst and yearn to get closer to ruchnius. Says the Rebbe, we're now going to go back to understand the pasuk Hasam Nafsheinu baxayim, v'zeu Hasam Nafsheinu baxayim v'lo nosel amet ragleinu. That is, when the person is involved in spirituality, in Torah and mitzvahs, this is when the person is like on the roish level, on the level of head. When a person gets involved in gashmis, the things, this is like the regel, this is like the foot. So what's giving us the ability that when I'm involved in worldly matters, I shouldn't slip, I shouldn't fall down, I shouldn't get carried away and too involved in the gashmi is? That is, how do I make that my feet should not stumble? This is from Hasam Nafsheinu Baxayim. Hu me'achayim shabahem Sam Nafsheinu hachayim shalamaylam hateva. For here I need to go to a darga that's higher than the soul has on its own. It needs to be a level that's a life that's higher than normal nature. Shalamaylam echaya nefesh atzma. Even that level that we spoke about in the beginning of the Maamar, that the nefesh is alive in its very essence. Why is that? Because if we speak just as far as the soul itself is concerned, even this highest form of chai be'etzem, it's possible that his whole desire is going to be finding the elikus in the worldly matters itself. In other words, that's where it's at. But if the focus is only about the worldly matters themselves and only on the gashmis itself and trying to find the shayrish of the gashmis, the advantage of the gashmis, the elikus of the gashmis, but if my involvement in gashmis is not keeping in mind that I'm doing this in order to learn Torah better, in order to be able to keep a mitzvah, then it's very possible that my involvement in gashmis is going to drag me down. It's going to get me too low. As said before, a person gets so involved in the gashmis thinking he's going to find its connections to elikus, but he gets over involved in the gashmis. In order not to stumble. And we said, what is that? That you make sure that when you're involved in inyanim of gashmis, it's always going to be l'shem shamayim. How do we do that? This needs to come to a place that's beyond the nature or the limitations of the nefesh itself, which could get carried away with its own understanding, its own way of finding the elikus and the gashmis. How do we become a keli for this idea of this higher form of chayim, which is going to keep us on the right track? That's the idea of bittul. It's only this form of life which is higher than limitation. This is going to allow me to connect these two opposites of chesed and gevura. What is that? What are these two opposites connecting? That is, that on the one hand, although I know there's a tremendous advantage in getting involved in the gashmias, and nevertheless, as a result of this bittul, I get to this level of the higher than limitation of allowing the chesed and gevura together. That means making sure that the gashmias is all for the fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs. Like we said before, the koirach attitude, or the way it could be mitzad machloikas before the tiferes, we said that if gevura is such an advantage, if gashmis is such an advantage, who wants to connect it to the ruchnius? But here we need that bittul and this koyach of the tiferes, or the koyach of the chayim that goes higher than nature, to combine these two opposites. And yes, there's an advantage in the gashmis, but the reason why gashmis was separated was in order to bring you closer to the ruchnius, to bring you closer to doing Torah and mitzvahs. The Rebbe now connects it to Yud Beis Tammuz. Now we can understand the connection between this pasuk, the way we explained the pasuk, with the goal of Yud Beis Tammuz. It's known that through the way Hashem runs the world, in the way of nature, which is always going in the same consistent way, so we know that there's Nes and there's Teva. Each one represents and brings out a certain idea, a certain inyan about Hashem. On the one hand, miracles, as we'll see in a minute, represents the Eibishter's infinite power that could just go beyond the world and destroy the nature of the world, etc. What does nature represent? Nature represents the idea of Hashem, that Ani Hashem lo yishanisi. Hashem has no change. And this is expressed in the inyanim of nature, which are consistent and constant, every single day exactly the same thing, how nature runs, and this is bringing out this idea of Hashem, Ani Hashem lo yishanisi. Ella, sha'inyan lo yishanisi, k'mo shemizgala ba'anhagas ha'ativis, hu melubish ba'agbalas ha'teva. The only thing is that the way this is being expressed in the natural order is clothed in the limitations of nature. So the way we see it, we look and things seem to be going in a natural way, in a consistent way. We might not realize that what it's really representing is this idea of elikus, which Hashem doesn't change. Now, nisim, the idea of a miracle, is representing and bringing down the level of elikus that's beyond the world. It's not limited by the world. Now, these two things, Nes and Teva, are really like the two ideas of Chesed and Gvura. The anhagas hateva, because nature, which is about tzimtzum v'agbola, this is the limitation. This is Hashem's contractual. We don't see Elokus in a revealed way. He may agvuris, these ideas of tzimtzum are rooted in the idea of gevura. Via shloimar, the zeh sheba anhaga hativ is davke mizgalo in the loisha nisi, who b'pnei sheshoyrish agvuris u'lemayla mishoyrish achsadim. In fact, over here, says the Rebbe says, here we see a similar idea to what we said before. Gevura has a certain advantage, a certain greatness. It comes from a higher place than chesed. As we said before, this is dafka where it's being expressed, that unlimited koyach in a certain way of Hashem, that He's not defined by anything. And Hashem can be found even in the lowly Gashmis of the world. And this is similar to this idea that we're saying now, that this darg of Ani Hashem loisha nisi, the fact that Hashem is beyond any change, is really expressed in the idea of anhagas hateva. Then we have anisim. What is the idea of a miracle? Gili shalamayla me'agbolas hateva. This is a revelation that's higher than the limitations of nature. Hey me'achsadim, this is an expression of chesed. So again, nes is the idea of chesed and gili elikus. Teva, on the other hand, is the idea of gevura and tzimtzumim. What's the idea of including the left side in the right side? That the expression of Hashem's bligvul that usually comes through miracles, the ultimate way is not that it breaks nature, breaks the gashmias, rather, even though nature is remaining as it is, and yet you see that it was really a miracle that's higher than nature. So this is like the idea that we were speaking about before, this idea of gevura and chesed really combining. On the one hand is teva, but you're able to notice in the teva that really it was a complete miracle. Says the Rebbe, ulay shloima, perhaps we could say, the masha kosav betanya, the inyan shitav by midas harachim was galus alikus adei tzadikim v'oisus u'moifsim. The Alter Rebbe says in Shar Yichud ve'emunah, we know that it says that the Eibishter in the beginning of creation wanted to create the world through midas hadin, which would mean, in other words, complete tzimtzum, complete concealment of Hashem's Zohar. But Hashem saw the world couldn't exist like that, so Hashem put in the midas harachimim, some compassion in it. The Alter Rebbe explains that this represents that Hashem did put in some gili elikus in the world, and that's through the tzaddikim and miracles, etc. Says the Rebbe, really, the main miracles we're speaking about are the miracles that are clothed in nature. Look at the words the Alter Rebbe uses, based on the Medrash. Shitiv boy. In other words, shitiv boy midas harachim. We still have the midas hadin, we still have the nature, but included inside of that is also a miracle. Pure miracles, that's chesed. But the nature in which it's clothed, that comes from gevura. And that's why we use the term shittim by midas harachamim. Why using midas harachamim? Because rachamim, compassion, that's tiferes. That has the ability to combine these two opposites of chesed and gevura. So once we understood, again, that nes is chesed, gili elikus. Teva on the one hand is a certain symptom, but it's expressing another aspect of Hashem, the idea of aniyavaya lo shanisi. And the ultimate is the chesed and the gevura joining. That's the midas harachamim. Says the Rebbe, v'zeu ha'shaychas Hasam Nafsheinu Baxayim goymer la geula of Yud Beis Tammuz. Now we can understand the connection between this pasuk and the geula of Yud Beis Tammuz. Ki ha'geula of Yud Beis Tammuz, because the geula of Yud Beis Tammuz koilel gamas cholas ha'geula shoyse b'Gimel Tammuz, including also the beginning of the geula that happened on Gimel Tammuz. So on the one hand, it was was a miracle, an open miracle, completely beyond nature. And yet it didn't break nature, it didn't nullify nature. Nature remained as it is. And furthermore, you have all the people that were trying to oppose the Frierdiker Rebbe. The pshat is not that suddenly they disappeared. They remained, and they remained in their full strength. And yet these same people that arrested the Frierdiker Rebbe, they, with all their strength and through all their strength, they needed to now help Shiur in releasing and freeing the Frierdiker Rebbe. And this is what causes this separation. It nullifies the distinction, the separation between the Tachtonim and Elyonim. It causes, again, la'achlola, small and yamin, and nes and teva coming together, small and yamin coming together, chesed and gevura coming together. And again, this is the idea of Hasam, Nafsheinu, Bachaim, as we explained before. This is that life that's beyond the normal nefesh's life, which could combine these two opposites. This gives us the ability each and every year to also be able to separate that, to nullify that separation, which exists between when we're involved in worldly things and fulfilling Torah mitzvahs. What does it mean to nullify the separation? That even in our mundane things, the light of Torah, the light of mitzvahs should shine. And this becomes a quick and immediate preparation the fulfillment of the promise that the glory of Hashem will be revealed, and all flesh together will see. That's the word of Hashem that is spoken. Meaning, that even Gashmi should see Elikus, even the physical flesh should see godliness. And again, all of this happens through the miracles that are performed through the tzaddikim, because they draw down into nature. Gili Elikus Shalamayla have a revelation of godliness that's higher than nature, just as it was by Yomim Oheim Bizman Hazeh.